Hello again and welcome. In my last video I said that I wanted to speak to you about reading the Bible, and the reason was that I often get people who tell me that in an attempt to grow close to God they've decided to read the whole Bible through. And while you can only admire this undertaking, which is certainly nothing to be taken lightly, it is important that if you're going to undertake this, that you understand what you're reading. Since the Bible is not a single book, but really a library of books, one needs to know on each occasion what you're reading and what the background to it was. This is the only way you can make real sense of what you're reading. And the reason for this is that especially the Old Testament contains all sorts of writing. For example, there are historical accounts, but there are also didactic novels, that is, stories that are there to convey a teaching and not to tell facts that actually happened. There's poetry, there are legal documents in the sense of laying down the law for how people should live. There's also apocryphal writing, which is something that we have great difficulty understanding in our time because it's not something that's included in our culture. And if you read all of these different types of writing as fact, you're obviously going to find yourself in difficulty. A very simple example of this would be that in the very first part of Genesis, we all have heard about the story of the creation, and we all know about the creation in 6 days and then God resting on the seventh day. However, if you read that as a factual account, you very soon find yourself in difficulty explaining how it could be, because God created on the first day light, and then there was evening and morning the first day, and then the second day he separated the waters above from the waters below. On the third day he divided the waters below, creating dry land and sea and waterways, and created the plants of the earth. On the fourth day, God created the sun and the moon. On the fifth day, he created the sea, waterborne creatures and birds. And on the sixth day, he created land animals and man. Now, the difficulties are obvious. First of all, if man was only created on the sixth day, who was following this creation and writing down the account of how it happened? Another thing would be, if the moon and sun were only created on the fourth day, how did we have day and night for the other days? And this is very interesting, that in his way of dealing with us, God allows us, despite our limitations sometimes, to understand things, to convey a teaching in any case to people. And the fact is, this text that I've just been talking about was written not ever intended to be as a factual account of how creation happened. It was merely to convey the teaching by word of mouth that God created everything, and everything he created was good. You see, the Jews were in slavery in Babylonia at the time, and the difficulty they had is that they didn't know whether their books in Jerusalem had survived or not, and so the priests had to come up with a way of giving the people something they could pass on from generation to generation and could remember easily, and so they framed it according to the 7 days. However, they didn't know that the sun and moon created day and night, and that's why there's that limitation to the story. And so, as I say, if you go and tackle the Bible as if it was all a factual account, you're going to find yourself in great difficulty, especially when it comes to apocryphal type writing. If I were to suggest to you the best way to begin tackling the scriptures, I would say, if you would begin with the Gospels, because as we know, the Gospels are the core of the Scriptures, because prior to the Gospels we have the Old Testament, and from the Gospels on we have the New Testament, and so this dividing line between the two was the life of Christ, which is spoken about in the Gospels. Even when we come to reading the Gospels, however, we do need to know beforehand that there are some differences between one Gospel account and another, and this is perfectly normal, because the Gospels, the four accounts, were written by different people at different times with different roles in what happened. And so we have Matthew, for example, who was an educated Jew and wrote mainly for Jews, and so his account is very much concentrated on the Messiah. Whereas Mark was the disciple of Peter, and so a lot of what he writes in his Gospel was what he learned from Peter and heard from Peter as to what had happened. Luke, on the other hand, it seems never actually met Jesus, but he wrote his account based on what he learned from Mary. And so this is why, if you're looking for infancy narratives about Jesus, you find them in Luke's Gospel. And then John wrote his Gospel a lot later than the other Gospels, and so the church had already begun to develop, and many questions had arisen, and this is why his is more theological, answering some of those queries and some of those doubts that had arisen already in the community. So as I say, you need to take these into account, and this is nothing strange. In our own world, if you get two people telling the same story, but they come at it from different backgrounds, they'll tell it differently, and their memories of it will be different. And whether how closely involved they were in the event and so on will change how they will tell you the story. And so we should take these differences as being perfectly normal. If you do want to start studying the Bible, which is a very good way to go, I would suggest, however, that you buy a Bible that is meant for research and for study. This is one I use, which is, as you can see, rather a large volume. Because in these scriptures, what's very helpful is, apart from an introduction to each book, which is essential for knowing what you're reading and some of the background to what you're reading, you'll find that alongside the text in the margin here, you have references that show you where this same topic is dealt with elsewhere in the scriptures. And also at the bottom of the page there are notes that would explain terms and things that may be unusual, and so give you a better chance of actually understanding properly what you're reading. And so while I would urge you to read the Gospels, to take on this task of coming close to God by reading His Word, I ask that you do so with enough background reading to know what it is that you're reading, and so you can get the proper meaning from it. And this will help you grow much better, on a much firmer basis, and in a much more sensible way. And I hope this will be of help to you. May God bless you.